Texas Governor Greg Abbott just recently signed a bill into law that reduces the licensing fees for handguns. Now, while he was doing a little bit of a press event for this bill, he said something a little questionable. I'll get to his statement in just a second, but first, take a look at this video of him shooting a handgun.
Well, I could watch that all after.
Yeah, boy, that was
Can we run it again, or is that
great?
That was so studly.
I was starting to get a little excited. It was sort of disturbing.
Okay, so anyway, there were reporters obviously filming that and tweeting about what was going on, and then something really stood out. Okay, Greg Abbott said the following in a jokey manner, but it's a little too soon considering what just happened with Greg Gianforte in Montana. He said, "I'm gonna carry this around in case I see any reporters." He had a gun in his hand, right? Wow, you guys discuss.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's signaling some type of regime change, because if there's no freedom of press, then we're not in a democracy anymore. Right. So I don't know, that's
I would normally
pretty bad joke.
A year ago, I would have been like, well, he's kidding, he's joking. There's a naturally adversarial relationship between the governor, especially this governor, and people interested in the truth, right? Because he's because we know what he is. But in general, okay, if you leave that out, there's an adversarial relationship between politicians and the press. So you make that joke, don't care, let it go. Not the greatest joke. Believe me, there are worse. But in light of Donald Trump's open hostility to reporters, and I don't exempt Barack Obama from the mistakes that they made with journalists either. If you think it's the same, again, you are burying your head in the sand. There is a palpable shift in attitude where we've said it, we've winked at people and said, you go ahead, you stand, the way reporters were treated at Trump rallies, the way the people at Trump rallies treated reporters, the way Greg Gianforte treated Ben Jacobs, and a number of other cases of reporters being strong-arm, manhandled. That reporter who got arrested, was it in, when he tried to question Tom Price, was that in Texas too? I feel like that was in Texas, but I might be mistaken about that. Reporter arrested because he was asking Tom Price, Secretary now of Health and Human Services, I believe, tried to ask him questions. As he walked down the hallway, the guy had his credentials were literally hanging around. He's been a reporter for like 19 years there. Everybody knows him. Arrested. So yeah, then it becomes a little less funny. As a side note, I can't think of a worse way to spend my time than going to a media event. I mean, that's why I'm not a local reporter anymore. Yeah. Standing in there, and I'd be like, I watched the governor fire off 6 rounds.
Right, and just film like a repetitive.
And then we'll put it on TV because it's, you think they'll use that as a natural sound break, Mark, there in between their piece? Right. Yeah, but for Governor Abbott, choom, choom. He says it's time to get tough, choom, choom, on crime, choom, choom.
And lacking from that story will be any kind of what you'll get here, or presumably and maybe in a few other places, a discussion of the situation with gun laws there, and as Ben says, it's going to be played as a tough on crime, and the machismo of that moment is something that will be allowed to play unquestioned. I'm with Ben on this. Really, quite recently, I would have said, "Come on, the guy's joking around." Like, he's referencing an adversarial relationship. But the truth is that this adversarial relationship, good-natured adversarial relationship that Washington and politicians have had with the press, has become a pretty ugly matter. I mean, to the point that I think you have to note, everyone who deals with the press and in public, that you can't make these jokes anymore.
I mean, reporters barely even challenge politicians that much, right? Like, think about the whole Gianforte thing and how the reporter's question was just incredibly tame. It was a simple question about, hey, what do you think about this new analysis of the healthcare replacement? Loses his mind over that, right? But the reason why I'm even bringing that up is, don't let these politicians convince you, regardless of what your political ideology is, don't let them convince you that media is the enemy and we should do away with them. if you buy into that argument, you are actually working against yourself, right? The media is not the enemy. The media is supposed to hold elected officials and people in power accountable for their actions. They're supposed to inform you and give you information about what's really going on. If you do away with the media, first of all, you do away with something that's protected under the Constitution. And secondly, you do away with something that's supposed to help you as a US citizen, right? Don't let someone like Greg Abbott or Greg Abbott.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, they're both Gregs.
They're
wow.
both Gregs.
It just hit me right now. Don't let someone like Greg Abbott or Greg Gianforte, change the narrative of what journalism is supposed to be and how important media really is.
And I still want pieces too, because it goes to what you're saying with the Abbott thing and the shooting. I hope I don't destroy her name, but she works for CNN. Kyung La, she was out in front of the polling places when Gianforte and the race was happening in Montana. One of the things she pointed out was the Montana voters are coming in. Many of them were talking about how they're still going to vote for him, or they're even more likely to vote for him. One of them said, because when they found out that she is from CNN, you're lucky someone doesn't pop one of you to her face as they're walking in to vote. So it goes beyond just, the governor of Texas decided to shoot off some rounds and talk about how he's such a good shot and then threaten reporters. No, citizens who think they're supporting you think you're giving them a call to arms to do this to people. So this is when things like this happen.
That's a great point. There's a tweet today from Mark Sanford, former governor of South Carolina, now a congressman who did the Appalachian Trail nonsense. He has an amusing history, but nonetheless, Sanford today pointed out that he's hearing from constituents who essentially are saying that the anger and venom, he was talking about racism generally, but it certainly applies to reporters too, that because Donald Trump can say it, not just racism, sexism, all of the isms, that he's like, hey man, the president gets to say whatever he wants and gets away with it. Why can't I? Like the notion that Donald Trump, that his worldview and his manner of talking about women and talking about Mexicans and talking about and starting in the 80s talking about black people and obviously talking about Islam, that his sort of freedom to do this in a cavalier, reckless, harmful, destructive way. Forget harmful, I'm not talking about people's emotions. I'm talking about the impact that it has on policy and on their lives. That it's not gonna have that it's not gonna slide down, and that which we have seen in that exact moment that JR describes of a person feeling comfortable saying to a reporter from CNN, you're lucky somebody doesn't pop you.
Right. I mean, to your point, I agree with you, Anna. People don't understand that oppressing the press is actually like a human rights violation, because that's what it's for. It's to allow the populace to understand and be able to investigate what's going on and go places they can't go and ask questions they can't ask. So I think to the extent that people understand that it's actually not allowing a free press is a human rights violation. It's that serious. It's not just an individual person from the media that you're like, oh, well, we're all upset because, this one person was harmed, or this other reporter was harmed, or the CNN reporter was threatened. It's actually a whole entire system that the democracy is relying upon.
But
to Anna's other point quickly, I think the notion that the press has been watered down is really a huge notion that one should understand. We're not even talking about a press that's legitimately adversarial in any kind of meaningful way. The press has been defanged in this country. It's been defanged for a lot of different reasons. Most of them have to do with commercialism. But that's why conversations like this don't really go on in mainstream media. But having said that, it becomes even more loathsome. You turn on a press that really isn't even that effective.
Right.
But it's now, first of all, I think we should acknowledge that there's been a rebirth of some serious journalism, especially in print, that if there's nothing good that comes out of Donald Trump. But one of the symptoms of Donald Trump that is that I can live with is that there's an attempt to refang the press. The obstacles that undermined press effectiveness for the last 37 years are not going away. So it's going to be an endlessly uphill climb. But there is certainly in print and at some significant publications online also a more adversarial relationship, and that's welcomed. But after 37 years, starting basically in the Reagan administration, of an attempt led by Rush Limbaugh, who we talked about in an earlier story today, and then followed up by Fox News whenever they launched in 1990 and started ruining the world. And Mark Levin and all these sort of hateful guys on talk radio saying the press is lying to you. They're dishonest, they're not you, they're not with you, they're leftists and should not be believed. and academics are leftists and should not be believed, and scientists are leftists and should not be believed. Essentially taking 3 of the most knowledgeable groups of people that we have in this country. They'd already done it to lawyers, right? That one was easier. But you take these groups of people who sort of dedicated their lives to learning things and then sharing their knowledge with other people, and Rush Limbaugh led a movement that Fox followed and picked up the mantle on to spread disinformation about them, to undermine their credibility. And what do you know? It worked.
It worked.
It worked 100%.
Yes.
And Donald Trump is the creation, is the magical gift that 37 years of disinformation gave to this country.
Right, absolutely. And that propaganda has worked, and it was very obvious during the past election, where if you even attempted to provide evidence, against someone like Donald Trump, you were immediately brushed off as elitist, as someone who doesn't understand, a certain population of America. And it was frustrating, because how do you convince people that are already so sure that you're working against them, right? Like, how do you convince them that, no, I'm not against you, I'm not an elitist, I'm just trying to give you information so you make a smart choice. And it's very difficult to fight back against that propaganda, because it did seep into society, and it's been very effective.
Yeah. And no one helped the lawyers when we were being bashed. But when the Muslim ban happened, the lawyers were the people who had to run to the airports and sit down and type petitions on the laptop for free. The evil, terrible underbelly of the world. The lawyers, are there on the front line of the Constitution. And not to toot lawyers' horns, but they're gonna have to rescue the media. Like, when the First Amendment is gonna start to be suppressed, it's the lawyers that are gonna have to step up and do the petitions and go to the Supreme Court and and make it right and fix it.
Yeah.
So
well, they're good lawyers and bad lawyers too.
And they're good journalists and bad journalists too, and TV
just like
journalism.
With any other field of work.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I'm not defending all journalists. I'm just saying, as a rule, don't disbelieve something because it came from a reporter, and we're not getting any help from some on the left in that regard either.
Young Turks now has over 6 billion lifetime views. You know who did that? You did that. We're now larger than CNN, ABC, you name a news network online, we're larger than them. And you built all that as everyone scoffed and didn't believe. And here we are, guys, thanks to you. Build independent media together with us at tytnetwork.com/join.